As the security guards hauled Vic toward the iron gates, her heels dragged through the gravel, leaving jagged lines in the pristine driveway. "You'll regret this, Daniels," she screamed, her voice cracking against the upbeat jazz music. In the struggle, her weathered bag flew open, and a yellowed, wax-sealed envelope tumbled onto the marble path. Daniels stepped forward, his face a mask of arrogance, ready to kick the trash away, until his eyes landed on the bold, handwritten script on the cover, "Original Deed of Ancestral Inheritance." The color drained from his face instantly. He lunged for the paper, but a gust of wind sent it skittering toward Vanessa, who picked it up with a curious frown. "Don't touch that," Daniels barked, his voice laced with a panic he couldn't hide. He realized in a heartbeat that while he had erased Vic from his life, he had failed to legally erase her from the land his new empire was built upon. As the gates slammed shut, locking Vic out in the dust, she caught his terrified gaze through the bars. She didn't have her money or her man, but she saw the one thing that gave her life, the look of a predator who realized he was actually the prey. While watching this video, kindly hit the subscribe button, like, and comment on where you are watching it from. I want to know how far the story has traveled. Let me also hear your thoughts at the end of this story. The dusty village of McKinney sat still under the scorching afternoon sun as Vic stood before the local land registry, her hands trembling around a tattered piece of paper. This wasn't just any document, it was the deed to the 3 acres her father had defended with his life, the only thing that stood between her and total destitution. Behind her, the orange basket she carried every day felt heavier than ever, the scent of citrus clinging to her skin like a permanent reminder of her labor. Daniel stood beside her, his eyes bright with a hunger that she mistook for ambition and love. "Once I finish this final semester, Vic, everything changes," he whispered, his voice smooth like honey. "I'll buy you 10 times this land. I'll build you a house where you'll never have to peel another orange again." Vic looked at his worn shoes and the thinness of his frame, and her heart melted. She didn't see a predator, she saw a dream that she had the power to fund. With a shaky breath, she dipped the quill into the ink. The village elders watched in somber silence, their faces etched with disapproval. They knew the value of the soil, but Vic only knew the value of the man standing next to her. As the ink dried on the transfer of ownership, Vic felt a strange chill, despite the heat. She had just traded her ancestors' legacy for a promise written in the sand. She handed the heavy bag of coins, the proceeds from the sale, to Daniels. He didn't even look at the land one last time, he only looked at the money. "I'll call you the moment I reach the city," he promised, already turning his back toward the main road. Vic watched him walk away until he was just a speck of dust on the horizon. She returned to her porch, picked up her peeling knife, and reached for an orange. Her land was gone, her security was gone, but her hope was full. She believed she wasn't losing a farm, she was planting a future. She didn't know then that the man she just saved was already planning how to bury her memory in the very dirt she had sold for him. The weeks in McKinney turned into months, and the vibrant orange of the harvest began to fade into the dusty gray of the dry season. Every evening, after walking 5 miles back from the main road, Vic would sit on her porch, her eyes glued to the cracked screen of her basic mobile phone. She kept it plugged into a small solar charger she had bought with her meager savings, terrified that the one moment he called would be the moment her battery died. But the screen remained dark. The vibrant, "I love you" texts that used to light up her nights had dwindled to one-word replies, then to silence. At first, Vic made excuses for him. She told the village gossips that the city was a busy place, that law school was a monster that ate a man's time. She told herself that his silence was the sound of hard work. But as the 3rd month of silence dragged on, the knot in her stomach tightened. She had sent him the last of the money from the land sale weeks ago, and since then, not even a "thank you" had crossed the digital void. Her calls went straight to voicemail, a cold, robotic voice replacing the warm tones of the man she had sacrificed everything for. One evening, as she stared at her yellow-stained palms, a realization hit her like a physical blow. She was disappearing. While he was being built up by her labor, she was eroding away. The villagers no longer looked at her with pity, they looked at her with the knowing eyes of people who had seen this story 1,000 times before. "He's forgotten the ladder he climbed on," they whispered behind their hands. Vic stood up, her jaw tightening. She wouldn't let her story end as a village tragedy. She counted the small stack of crumpled notes she had hidden under her mattress, money she had saved by eating only the bruised oranges she couldn't sell. It was just enough for a one-way bus ticket to the city. She didn't have a fancy dress or a suitcase, she only had her orange basket and the burning need to see his face. She convinced herself that once he saw her, once he remembered the smell of the village and the warmth of her hand, the silence would break. She packed her tattered shawl and headed for the main road under the cover of dawn, her heart a frantic bird in her chest. She was going to surprise him, unaware that the city had already transformed him into a stranger she wouldn't recognize. The bus groaned to a halt, belching a cloud of black smoke that mingled with the humid city air. Vic stepped onto the cracked pavement of the capital, her legs cramped from the 12-hour journey and her orange basket clutched tightly to her chest. The city was a cacophony of screeching tires, shouting vendors, and towering glass structures that seemed to pierce the very clouds she had watched from her village porch. She felt small, a single drop of rain in a vast, indifferent ocean. Everything was faster, louder, and colder than she had imagined. As she navigated the swarmed sidewalks, her eyes scanned the faces of passing strangers, looking for a glimmer of the kindness she knew back home. But here, eyes were fixed on glowing phone screens or distant horizons. No one saw the girl in the faded headscarf, to them, she was just an obstacle to be bypassed. Vic pulled out her crumpled piece of paper with the address of the law school, her heart racing. She was so close. She could almost feel the warmth of Daniel's embrace, the moment he would tell her that the silence was all a big mistake. Then, she stopped dead in her tracks. High above the intersection, draped across the side of a massive skyscraper, was a billboard that stole the breath from her lungs. It was a luxury real estate advertisement, bathed in soft, golden light. There, in a crisp navy suit that cost more than her village's entire harvest, was Daniels. He wasn't the thin, hungry boy she had sent away. He looked regal, polished, and powerful. But he wasn't alone. Leaning into him, her hand resting possessively on his chest, was a woman who looked like she was carved from diamonds. Vanessa. Her smile was perfect, her eyes sparkling with the confidence of someone who had never known a day of hunger. The caption beneath them read, "Building Legacies of Elegance." Vic's basket slipped from her fingers. A few bruised oranges tumbled out, rolling into the gutter, but she didn't move to pick them up. The sunlight, once her friend in the fields, now felt like a spotlight on her poverty. She looked at her yellow-stained fingers, then back at the billboard where Daniel's hand, the same hand that had promised to build her a mansion, was entwined with Vanessa's. The city didn't just have tall buildings, it had high walls, and she realized with a sickening thud in her chest that Daniels hadn't just moved to the city. He had moved to a world where people like her didn't exist. The future she had planted with the sale of her father's land was blooming, but she wasn't the one intended to harvest it. Vic sat on the dusty curb outside the mansion's towering perimeter, her knees pulled to her chest. The echoes of Daniel's denial still rang in her ears, sharper than the sting of the gravel beneath her. She was a mad woman, a beggar, a mistake. Every time a car drove past, the headlights illuminated her tear-streaked face, making her feel like a ghost haunting the gates of a life she had paid for but wasn't allowed to live. "That's a heavy burden for such small shoulders to carry," a deep, calm voice drifted through the darkness. Vic startled, looking up to see an older man standing by a sleek silver sedan. He was dressed in a well-tailored suit, but his eyes held a kindness that the rest of the city lacked. He looked at her tattered headscarf and the broken gift lying in the dirt, then at the mansion behind her. "I am Barrister Ade," he said, extending a hand. "I've been watching you from my balcony across the street." I haven't seen someone fight that hard for a man who clearly doesn't deserve a single one of your tears. Vic wiped her eyes with her sleeve, her voice a mere whisper. I have nothing left. I sold my father's land for him. I thought we were building a home. The lawyer's expression shifted from pity to intense focus. Did you say your father's land? In McKinney? When Vic nodded, the man's eyes widened. Your father was Matsi Okoye. He was my first client, 20 years ago. He was a man who believed that the soil was a sacred trust. He knelt beside her, ignoring the dust on his expensive trousers. If you are Okoye's daughter, then you aren't a beggar. You are the heir to a legacy that people like Daniels can only dream of. I was there when your father drew up the ancestral protections for that land. Protections that no simple sale can easily erase. Vic looked at him, a flicker of something long dormant, hope, igniting in her chest. The lawyer reached into his pocket and handed her a clean silk handkerchief. Daniels thinks he has won because he has the mansion and the gold. But he doesn't know the law, and he clearly didn't know your father. That land he's so proud of? It's a poison chalice if it wasn't signed away correctly. He stood up, offering his hand once more. The city has been cold to you, Vic. But justice is a fire that starts with a single spark. Come with me. Let's look at those papers again. It's time we reminded the world that the daughter of Okoye doesn't break, she only waits for her turn to. The transformation did not happen in the bright lights of a showroom, but in the quiet, paper-strewn sanctuary of Barrister Aid's library. For the first month, Vic's hands, once stained yellow by thousands of oranges, were stained black by the ink of law books and property ledgers. She traded her orange basket for a briefcase and her silence for a voice that began to steady with every page she turned. Under Aid's watchful eye, she didn't just learn how to speak, she learned how to dissect a contract until it bled the truth. She realized that Daniels hadn't just stolen her money, he had banked on her ignorance. By the third month, the village girl named Vic began to fade, replaced by a woman who moved with the calculated grace of a predator. Barrister Ade hired tutors to refine her accent and stylists to sharpen her image, but the fire in her eyes remained her own. She spent 14 hours a day studying corporate structures, realizing that the land she had sold sat at the center of a $1 billion development project Daniels was spearheading for Vanessa's father. She wasn't just a jilted lover anymore, she was the only person standing in the way of a corporate empire built on a foundation of sand. As her skin softened and her wardrobe shifted to tailored silk and sharp blazers, she adopted the name her father had always used in his most formal dreams, Amina Okoye. Vic was the girl who suffered in silence, but Amina was the woman who would demand an accounting. She practiced her composure in front of the mirror, learning how to mask her pain with a cold, professional smile that never quite reached her eyes. Whenever her resolve wavered, she would look at the faded photograph of her father standing on their McKinney soil. She remembered the smell of the dust at the mansion gates and the sound of Vanessa's cruel laughter. By the end of the 6th month, the transformation was complete. The woman who walked out of Barrister Aid's office was no longer a victim seeking an explanation, she was an executive seeking an execution. She had mastered the language of the city, the intricacies of the law, and the art of the glow-up. Amina Okoye was ready to reclaim her land, and she was going to do it in the one place Daniels felt safest, the boardroom. The orange cellar was gone, the owner had arrived. The heavy, leather-bound files on Barrister Aid's desk felt like the keys to a kingdom as Amina, once known as Vic, pored over them beneath the dim glow of the study lamp. For months, she had lived under the shadow of her own sacrifice, believing that her signature on that dusty village afternoon had stripped her of her birthright forever. But as Ade traced a gnarled finger over the photocopied deed, a slow, triumphant smile spread across his face. Daniels was greedy, Amina, but he was also remarkably sloppy, the lawyer whispered, sliding a magnifying glass toward her. Look at the witness signatures. In McKinney, for ancestral land to be legally severed from a family lineage, the head of the kindred must sign in the presence of a judicial officer. Your uncle was the head of the kindred, but he was in the hospital that day. This signature? It's a forgery. A desperate, hurried imitation. Amina felt a jolt of electricity surge through her veins. She leaned in, her heart hammering against her ribs. The document that Daniels had used to build his reputation, the very paper he thought had secured his future with Vanessa's family, was a lie. Because the initial transfer was fraudulent, every subsequent deal Daniels had made, the development contracts, the bank loans, the partnership with the billionaire, was built on a legal void. The land never left your hands, Amina, Ade continued, his voice hardening with professional satisfaction. Technically, you don't just own the soil. You own every brick, every steel beam, and every glass pane they have erected on that property. Daniels didn't just steal from you, he unknowingly built his entire empire on your front porch. Amina sat back, the weight of the realization settling over her like a suit of armor. She remembered the day she had signed that paper, the way she had looked at Daniels with eyes full of hope, while he looked at the ink with eyes full of theft. He had counted on her remaining a village girl, who would never know her rights, a ghost that would stay buried in the dust of Makini. A cold, calm clarity washed over her. She wasn't just going to ask for her money back. She held the power to stop the most expensive construction project in the city with a single injunction. She held the power to turn Daniels' legacy of elegance into a pile of legal rubble. As she closed the file, she didn't see the face of the girl who had been kicked at the gate, she saw the face of the woman who was about to evict a king. The loophole was no longer a crack in the door, it was a gateway to her revenge. The golden-edged invitation sat on Amina's vanity, a sharp contrast to the rough orange crates she had once called furniture. It was an invite to the Legacy of Elegance Gala, the very event where Daniels intended to announce the groundbreaking of his new skyscraper. The industry was buzzing about a mystery investor from the Okoye Group who had recently been snapping up distressed assets across the city. No one knew her face, but everyone feared her signature. Amina caught her reflection in the full-length mirror, and for a moment, she saw a ghost. She saw the girl with the dusty headscarf and the stained yellow fingers standing at the mansion gate, being called a dirty thing. She remembered the taste of the dirt in her mouth and the sound of Vanessa's laughter. But as she smoothed the fabric of her midnight blue silk gown, the color of a deep, unforgiving ocean, the ghost vanished. The woman staring back was a masterpiece of controlled fury. The stage is set, Barrister Ade whispered from the doorway, his eyes gleaming with pride. Daniels thinks he is inviting a savior to bail out his project's mounting legal debts. He has no idea he is inviting the executioner. Amina adjusted a diamond earring that caught the light like a shard of ice. He wanted a mystery, she said, her voice low and melodic, stripped of its village lilt. I'm going to give him a revelation. The gala was held in the same ballroom where she had been humiliated 6 months prior. As her sleek black sedan pulled up to the red carpet, the flashbulbs of the paparazzi created a blinding haze. When the door opened, the air seemed to chill. Amina stepped out, her posture regal, her gaze fixed forward. She didn't look like a girl who had ever carried a basket of oranges, she looked like a woman who owned the sun they grew under. Inside, the room was a sea of gold and champagne. She spotted Daniels immediately. He was laughing, his arm draped around Vanessa, playing the part of the successful mogul. He looked triumphant, unaware that the foundation of his life was already crumbling. As the master of ceremonies took the stage to announce the arrival of the evening's guest of honor, Amina took a slow, deep breath. Ladies and gentlemen, the announcer's voice boomed, please welcome the CEO of the Okoye Group, the woman who holds the future of this city in her hands, Ms. Amina Okoye. The room went silent as Amina stepped into the light. She saw Daniels turn, a polite, opportunistic smile fixed on his face. She watched the exact microsecond that smile died. She watched the glass in his hand tremble as his brain fought to reconcile the goddess in blue with the mad woman he had thrown into the street. The hunt had officially begun. The heavy oak doors of the executive boardroom swung shut with a muted thud, sealing out the festive noise of the gala. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of expensive cologne and the desperate tang of ozone from the air conditioner. Daniels stood at the head of the long mahogany table, sweating through his custom-tailored suit. He didn't look like a mogul anymore, he looked like a man standing on a trapdoor. Beside him, Vanessa's father looked grim, clutching a stack of legal notices that threatened to freeze their entire development project. "Ms. Okoye, thank you for meeting us privately," Daniels began, his voice cracking slightly. He still hadn't looked her fully in the eyes. To him, she was a financial deity, a mysterious savior who held the power to sign the land use waiver they so desperately needed. "As you know, there's been a minor clerical dispute regarding the ancestral title of the McKinney plot. It's a baseless claim by a disgruntled local, but the bank won't release the next tier of funding without your corporate guarantee." Amina sat in the high-backed leather chair, her hands, now soft, manicured, and adorned with a sapphire ring, folded calmly on the table. She watched him with a silence that was more terrifying than a scream. "The project is worth billions," Daniels continued, leaning forward, his palms flat on the table in a gesture of supplication. "If we don't get your signature tonight, the contractors will walk. My reputation, my marriage, my entire life is tied to this soil. I'm begging you. Just one signature on this waiver, and the Okoye Group will own 20% of the most prestigious skyline in the country." He slid a fountain pen toward her, the same gold pen he had likely used to sign the forged documents months ago. Amina finally looked up, her gaze locking onto his. The recognition didn't hit him all at once, it came in waves. He looked at the shape of her jaw, the fire in her irises, and finally, the way she tilted her head, exactly like the girl who used to share her water with him under the mango tree. "You want my signature to save your life?" Amina asked, her voice a cool blade. "Please," Daniels whispered, his eyes darting toward the door as if he could sense his world collapsing. "I'll do anything. I don't know what it will take to convince you, but I am at your mercy." Amina picked up the pen, the gold casing cool against her skin. She remembered the dirt of the driveway and the way he had looked at her like she was a stain on his carpet. She leaned in close, so close he could smell the expensive perfume that masked the ghost of oranges. "You told the world you didn't know me, Daniels," she whispered, the lilt of the village returning just for a second, enough to make his heart stop. "But you're about to find out exactly who I am." The silence in the room was so heavy it felt like it might crush the very table between them. Daniels watched the gold pen in Amina's hand as if it were a loaded weapon. His breath hitched as she finally lowered the nib to the parchment, the ink flowing in a smooth, authoritative stroke. He let out a ragged sob of relief, his shoulders slumping. "Thank you," he choked out, wiping sweat from his brow. "You've saved everything. I'll make sure the Okoye Group is celebrated for this." Amina didn't smile. She didn't even look at him as she slid the document back across the mahogany surface. "Read the addendum, Daniels," she said, her voice like ice cracking on a winter lake. Daniels frowned, his hands trembling as he pulled the paper toward him. His eyes raced over the lines, searching for the partnership terms he expected. Instead, his gaze froze on a single, bolded paragraph. The air left his lungs in a silent gasp. Amina hadn't signed a waiver to authorize the construction. She had signed a formal notice of eviction and an immediate cease and desist order. "What is this?" Vanessa's father roared, snatching the paper. "This says the project is being seized for fraudulent title claims." "It says," Amina corrected, standing up with a grace that silenced the room, "that because the original deed was never legally transferred from the Okoye estate, every structure built on that soil is now my property. And as the rightful owner, I find your presence, and your company, to be a stain on my land." Daniels looked up at her, his face a ghostly mask of terror. "Vic, please, you can't do this. We have nothing else. If this project fails, the banks will take everything. Vanessa and I will be on the street." Amina leaned over the table, her shadow falling over him just as the mansion's shadow had fallen over her at the gate. The street is a familiar place, Daniels. I spent many nights there while you were spending my father's legacy on silk ties and champagne. She leaned closer, her voice a deadly whisper. You told the world you didn't know me. Now, the world will know you as the man who was evicted by a dirty thing from the village. She turned and walked toward the door, her blue silk gown trailing behind her like a royal shroud. At the threshold, she paused, looking back one last time. Don't worry about the oranges, Daniels. I hear they're in season. Perhaps you can find work on the roadside. As she stepped out into the night, the heavy doors of the boardroom slammed shut behind her, the sound echoing through the hall like a gavel. The orange cellar was gone. The land had been reclaimed. And for the first time in 3 years, Amina Okoye breathed the air of a woman who was finally, completely free.